link that you should be able to see. There's links and downloads there. Today's also being recorded, so if you do need to drop out, please know that you can return and watch this. As there's so much that we're talking about today, we're going to have moderators. They're with us live, so if you've got something that you want to put in the chat, they'll answer any questions that you might have. And it looks like the room is full. It's time for us to get started. Welcome to SentinelOne's Q2 quarterly threat briefing for our North American time zones. If you've been watching the global threat landscape this quarter, you know things have moved fast. Supply chain attacks have been a real feature. Developer tools have been subverted, often those used by hundreds of millions of people. Dependencies have been corrupted all over the place. Nation-state actors have run coordinated campaigns against critical infrastructure. AI, which we're all hoping is going to be our saviors in security, has also been on the side of attackers. It's been weaponized aggressively by the threat landscape. What's most striking, however, is that even the most sophisticated attacks this quarter left behavioral fingerprints. And what's interesting about that is even when we're surprised by payloads, if we're looking for behaviors, if we're looking for threat activity, they can still be caught at speed. It just means we need to move outside of looking for signatures and looking for behavior. That's exactly what we're unpacking today. Joining the session today, we have 3 of SentinelOne's frontline experts with us. Together, they'll walk you through the global threat picture, what nation-state actors and cybercrime groups are prioritizing right now, and we'll talk about actual incidents from this quarter from the incident response trenches. And we're going to close with what we think you guys should prioritize as defenders, which is how to deal with supply chain risk, the AI inflection point we find ourselves at, and what detection techniques are working still strongly today. This is a 45-minute session, and we designed it to be dense and actionable. No filter, just the intelligence and recommendations that matter right now. Let's get into it. I'll hand each speaker to introduce themselves. Let's get started with Tom Hegel from Sentinel Labs. Tom, take it away.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Like they said, my name is Tom Hegel, Distinguished Threat Researcher with Sentinel Labs. Sentinel Labs is SentinelOne's public-facing threat intelligence team. We often do public research on the criminal networks, targeted advanced adversaries, and more recently into the security side of the applied threat intelligence and artificial intelligence side as well. So I spend my time tracking nation states and targeted adversaries, the actors behind a lot of what you'll see us talking about today on this webinar. And that is me, and I'll pass it over to Matt.
Well, thanks, Tom. Yeah, my name's Matt Weichert. I'm a senior manager on the digital forensics and incident response team here at SentinelOne. My entire team's services focused, customer facing. We're helping customers every day with any breaches they might incur and helping them investigate and provide recommendations on how to prevent it from happening again in the future. I'll pass it over to Steve.
Hey everyone, I'm Steve Ross. I'm a Vice President of Detection Engineering here at SentinelOne. So I lead our teams that do research and development for understanding the latest threats that are affecting our customers, updating and building new detection models that ship into our products across all of our platforms, Windows or Mac, Linux, cloud, as well as our security data lake platform. And we also work very closely with our services Wayfinder partners for co-delivering our hunt findings and other detection outcomes to all of SentinelOne's products and services customers.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to be kicking us off with the landscape overview. And this is going to be kind of the setting the tone for the newest activity of the quarter for each of us to go through. To first start, here's a bird's eye view of the threat landscape in the last quarter, all on one screen. On the left, we have basically the main incidents that have ultimately defined it. Supply chain, ultimately the biggest one of the quarter, and it stopped being really about a single poison package and has scaled up to a lot more. The great example I like to lean into is the Shai-Hulud malware activity and actor activity that showed up last September. Since then, it has spawned its a whole lineage of activity that has ran straight through since then, stealing tokens, replicating itself through worm-like activities, and so forth. The Axios compromise alone touched a library of around a few hundred thousand, or excuse me, a few hundred million weekly downloads. And analysts, ourselves and outsiders like our partners at Google have tied this back to North Korea. So it's moving from a really easy commodity side of the criminal network for supply chain intrusions to more targeted as well. Steve will be diving more into those shortly. Now, on the infrastructure side, Edge always, as always, remains the leading initial access method for a lot of our adversaries that we observe. FortiClient EMS, FortiGate, Ivanti, those are the kind of leading ones over the last quarter. And noteworthy here is the window to patch keeps shrinking every day. Exploitation is now routinely beating the advisories of new alerts or new vulnerabilities. And a lot of this is being even shrunken more because of the shift into AI vulnerability discovery. So that's going to be something that completely shifts on a 180 where exploitation is happening at scale before identification is even happening. So we're seeing that continually change as of this quarter. And geopolitically, the 2026 Iran war has, since our last webinar, has become a full-blown war. And that's reshaped the whole picture across the region, which I'll come back to more specifically. And then on the right-hand side, we have the trends that kind of support a lot of this. Supply chain has become a go-to weapon for criminal and state adversaries. Ransomware, through previous conversations, you may remember our ransomware conversations have been about many diverse groups. Now we're seeing a reconsolidation after a few different years of fragmentation. And I'll talk about that here more specifically in a second. And agentic AI continues to show up inside real attacks. The lines between state, criminal, and hacktivists, using all of those as well, is continuing to blur. And that is not only supporting a collection of different intrusions that are kind of blurring together, but it's also blurring together the side of attribution of knowing who is doing what type of attack and what their true objectives may be. Next slide, please. Okay, so first to kind of dive into some specifics here on the financially motivated side, we're going to start with the money. This is where we see a lot of our criminal network activity. Three things are worth your attention. First, credential theft into cloud computing and SaaS services continues to climb, as whether it's from a supply chain compromise or a commodity info stealer, the end game has continued to be the same, where valid credentials into your environment or your data is sought after for one way or another: extortion, exfiltration, reselling, and so forth. The strongest control here isn't necessarily a new tool, but we've observed just better identity hygiene is the best way for minimizing what's exposed in the first place. Minimizing that potential impact there is the main objective. Secondly, we've got the ClickFix side. Now, if you're not familiar with the name ClickFix, this is that fake CAPTCHA prompt where you copy and paste this command. It's a social engineering method. It's not going away. The operating system vendors have shipped mitigations to make it more difficult to copy blind code behind a fake CAPTCHA prompt. However, actors are, as always, evolving to move beyond that, and they're finding their next variation. So variants of ClickFix do remain strong over the last quarter, and it's a very strong social engineering method because users have been trained over years to try and copy and paste or do the ClickFix, or excuse me, do the CAPTCHA type stuff through daily routines. Third, and this one, let's go back one slide. Third, and this one's kind of surprises most people, is that ransomware side. Like I mentioned, we've had for 2 years, ransomware groups have fragmented it to dozens of smaller crews. Over the last quarter, that's seemingly reversed quite a bit. And from our perspective, the top 10 groups now drive the vast majority of ransomware victims. And the economics are interesting. The payment rates are continuing to go at historic lows. So groups are shifting more towards the pure data extortion, and increasingly using AI to scale that into affiliate panels, victim triage, and negotiations. The Gentleman Group is the cleanest example of that. They've basically industrialized this theme of using AI to both run ransomware and act as an access broker. And that we think is a trend that we'll continue to see as time goes on. And next slide, please. So on the nation state side, we're going to focus on two actors here. First, Iran. So the war that started at the end of February has essentially escalated everything in that region. There was a multi-week internet blackout inside the country, and the surge of pro-Iranian hacktivists activity claiming attacks in critical infrastructure and across the West and ultimately the Middle Eastern region as well. Now, thing to remember here, as we've talked about in the past, is a lot of those claims have been exaggerated, and that's only proven true with time since the conflict has become more part of daily routine at this point. The screenshots into water pumps and power grids, largely acting as theater of their successful intrusions with no true impact outside of impressions of global victims and so forth. The one that wasn't theater was the Stryker incident. That was the medical device maker that was hit by the pro-Iranian hacktivist group Handala. They reset a few 100,000 corporate devices in that process, took off the organization, and got a lot of media attention at the time. And now, that was the destructive operation that ultimately used no malware, just kind of living off the land through abused mobile device management software inside the organization. And that continues to be a trend we see with nation state actors is avoiding, especially on the destructive side, avoiding any sort of custom malware and just seeking to use legitimate SaaS, legitimate living off the land capabilities to make an impact. Now, second is North Korea. Primary asset for North Korea still does remain on the human side. The organization that runs the social engineering at scale does rely on humans to orchestrate it all. But AI now runs deeply throughout the entire operation through your variety of North Korean actors. On the IT worker side, we see the DPRK fake IT worker side, where they're getting hired as legitimate IT and programming talent inside organizations across the West and Europe. They're using AI to write resumes, scripting interviews, debugging malware on the more malware development side as well. So it's scaling and it's being relied on consistently by our North Korean adversaries. And the contagious interview campaign / actor, they are using AI to also seek out self-propagating capabilities through software supply chain intrusions as well. And that's where you see them looking to compromise open source software through targeting developers and AI talent throughout the world at this point. So even though the human intelligence actor is now riding the same supply chain as AI as everyone else, AI is becoming something that's supporting defenders and adversaries at this point. Next slide, please. So it's talking specifically on the AI-powered threats. The headline for this quarter is that AI misuse kind of crossed the line from assisting attackers to, in at least one case, largely running an attack. Shout out to our partners at Anthropic and others that have kind of added on top of it. They disclosed a campaign, which you can search up after this if you're curious. It's under the adversary tag GTG1002. This is where a Chinese actor drove an AI coding agent through the vast majority of an intrusion. They reported up to 90% of an intrusion. And that was a targeted attack against about 30 targets, operating at quite a huge scale of queries per second against their telemetry. But I'm mentioning that because that's the first documented case of an attack largely running without human in the loop. Now, something to remember here is this wasn't magic and it wasn't perfect. As reported, this attack was hallucinating at very noteworthy steps of the attack process, such as credentials being hallucinated, overstating what it accomplished, and ultimately needing humans still to interact at these points because mistakes are happening, which is where we lead into being able to find detection opportunities into these scenarios. So this is acceleration of our adversaries, not acting as like a super intelligent adversary. So it's not something to fear. It's just scaling up their capabilities and speeding things up. But that trajectory remains clear today. They don't need a frontier model from the big players out there like OpenAI or Anthropic. Sentinel Labs, my team, we published some research on some activity where a few 100,000 open source AI hosts are accessible from the internet, and about half those were able to execute code by remote outsiders. So that's an enormous, generally unmanaged attack surface sitting outside anyone's guardrail capabilities. So guardrails won't be stopping this from continuing. And lastly, here is the shadow IT, or excuse me, shadow AI. And this is where most organizations can't tell you their own legitimate AI footprint, let alone the anomalous use by their employees. And the frameworks we're leaning on right now as an industry, such as the MITRE ATT&CK and so forth, still have no identifier for the agentic the orchestration side of an attack. So part of the defensive gap right now is that we literally don't have vocabulary to define a lot of this. And that's kind of what it looks like right now in the what we're seeing through adversaries trying to adopt onto this. The industry really kind of needs to catch up. And yeah, so that's that. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Matt to walk through what some of these incidents look like in real life.
Oh, thanks, Tom. All right, so yeah, Tom just showed you the global threat landscape, how it stands now, and I'm going to walk you through more of what happens when a threat actor really arrives at your door. To illustrate that, I'm going to walk through three cases, all of them real time, or all of them are real, and they all share something that'll surprise you because none of them require sophisticated exploit, custom piece of malware, or any 0 days or anything like that. Each one of them either started with a phone call, stolen password, compromised account, and that's pretty much it. So, but before that, I want to talk about just kind of the ransomware supply chain a little more, give you that mental model, because most people's picture of ransomware attack is, I'd say, either wrong or misguided. The version most people think of kind of goes something like, a threat actor finds a vulnerability, exploits it, exfiltrates data, deploys an encryptor, and then demands money. And that's kind of I'd say the movie version of that. And it's really only one surface of what that might appear like. The actual version we see mostly in the field, it looks more like a franchise with a supply chain and more of a division of labor. But, like Tom said, some of these groups kind of consolidate a lot of these functions into the same group, but they're very distinct either people or subsections within that group that are kind of running these different functions. So at one end, you got info stealers phishing, quietly harvesting credentials, and those feed a market of initial access brokers or IABs, who are pure specialists. They get their initial access, package that access, and then sell that access. They don't deploy ransomware. They don't negotiate. They just sell the key to the door and move on. And the price of that door we're seeing is roughly, $500 can buy you access into a Fortune 500 company on some of the forums. And of course, that goes up as that access either gets better or the target gets more rich. From there, we'll see an affiliate, ransomware affiliate will buy that access. They get in, do their own recon. They'll escalate privileges, exfiltrate data, and then deploy the encryptor payload, which they'll usually license from a RAS or a RAS operator, ransomware as a service, who runs leak sites. They'll handle the negotiations with the victim and so forth. So around average time, we see the IAB listening to ransomware's deployment is around 19 days. Of course, that depends on many different factors, but that's kind of the average we've seen. But really the point here is every case I'm about to show you kind of connects back to this pipeline, whether the end goal is money, destruction, or both. Next slide, please. And so the three cases are all real. Some of them necessarily didn't happen this quarter, but they all kind of tie back into things we're still seeing every day, every week, every month this quarter. So the first case is kind of the cleanest example of how this pipeline actually plays out in practice. So I know a lot of people are familiar with Scattered Spider or the COM and the ransomware operator DragonForce. So in this first case, the threat actor called the help desk to get their initial access, and that's pretty much how they got in. That was it. They rang them up, impersonated an employee, talked to someone into resetting a password, and there was no malware, no vulnerability, no zero-day. It was just a phone call, right? So from there, they moved quietly. They found the way to their domain controller, made off with the Active Directory database, which is pretty common. Then kind of sat in there for a couple months without being detected. And in that time, they were reading internal Slack messages, team chats, emails. When the incident was eventually noticed, when the IR investigation actually started, they were already reading those channels and they knew what the response team knew, roughly around the same time that the response was happening. So, which is a pretty key TTP for this group. You see them like to get in pretty low and slow, and then just really get a lay of the land, read emails, read team chats, and that kind of thing. So later on in the timeline, the operations for that individual or for that company collapsed as one of the hypervisor farms was encrypted overnight. And that same wave hit multiple competitors within that industry as well. So the one thing that is really important to stand out is kind of how that worked, where Scattered Spider or the COM didn't deploy the ransomware or didn't build the ransomware, excuse me. They didn't run the leak site. They didn't negotiate with the victim. They contracted all that out to DragonForce, which is the RAS franchise. Second case, kind of touching on the same thing Tom was mentioning with Hendala and the Iranian threat actors. So he covered that at a macro level, state-directed cyber attacks, kind of blurring the state line of criminal and hacktivists. And really what this is to show is kind of what that blur looks like when it comes and lands inside of a specific corporate environment. So really what Tom mentioned, the goal here wasn't money. It was happened to a major medical device company. Staff arrived to work with blank screens, about 200,000 devices, corporate and personal BYOD had been wiped overnight, not encrypted, but they were just completely wiped out. So the group they claimed responsibility was Hendala, which is an Iranian-linked hacktivist group. The attack came a couple weeks after the U.S. and Israeli military strikes in Iran. So it wasn't ransomware, no ransom demand. It was just purely destruction, geopolitical sabotage, which is kind of interesting to see. But around 280 so credentials were harvested by InfoStealers over the 5 months prior to the attack, from what we've seen. And that's where the threat actors worked their way into Entra ID to get a hold of the global admin account. And that's where they weaponized a tool that was already in the environment, which is Microsoft Intune. And that's their own mobile device management platform, which is a tool that's designed more to manage and protect devices, but it gets weaponized by a threat actor that has ill intent, right? So again, no CVE, no zero-day, it's just credentials in an admin account on a legitimate platform within the environment. And that was essentially the whole attack on that one. Case 3, I know Steve's going to walk more through the software supply chain attacks in a moment. But this third case is a little different of flavor of the same problem. It's not a poison package or what happens when it's really what happens when around 80% of a sector depends on a single vendor. So the risk category is more concentration and trust, which is a completely different attack surface. But yeah, earlier this year there was a Dutch healthcare provider gets hit with ransomware, and they make the electronic healthcare records for I think it's roughly 80% of the Dutch hospitals. So one vendor, and when that vendor goes down, 11 hospital systems go offline, patient data, diagnosis, treatment histories, national ID numbers, all potentially at risk or stolen. So the vendor consolidation creates efficiency, but it also creates a systemic fragility. And in healthcare, that fragility has a direct line to patient outcomes. So that's a kind of a board level conversation, not an IT conversation, right? Next slide, please. So kind of what to do about the pattern. We had saw three different attacks, three different countries, three different sectors, but all share similar TTPs. Again, not every single one of them started either with identity, not a CVE. So it was a help desk call, harvested credentials, admin accounts, nobody exploited a vulnerability. Second, they all weaponized legitimate tooling, so Active Directory, ESXi, Microsoft Intune. So the threat actor didn't have to weaponize or bring a weapon into the environment. They used what was already inside the environment, which, I know Tom mentioned, but that's pretty common living off the land. We see that a lot more frequently, where they're not specifically using custom malware. It's just going to be either RMM tools or other things that are already deployed in the environment. Sometimes we do see them bring in their own RMMs, but if you're not doing a constant audit checks of what's in your environment or what normal looks like, it's very hard to, or very easy to miss those things. So say for the leaders in the room, help desk is really your security control. If you can reset credentials without verifying identity, it's an open door. Standard MFA like push notifications, OTP, SMS, doesn't necessarily protect you against modern phishing attempts. And only thing that does is phishing resistant credentials and your MDM platforms and admin accounts are the crown jewels as they always have been. But then for practitioners, alerts on signals as they show up early. So NTDS.data access, LSAS dumps, anomalous entry ID activity, using out-of-band communications during incidents, especially for groups that are known for that and some that aren't. It's just always a good practice to take your comms out of band, not use what's normal for corporate communications. But you're going to want to have those contingencies set up in place with playbooks and stuff before an incident does occur, just so everyone's on the same page. Yeah, and then if you can, web credential monitoring on the dark web. So if your credentials do turn up in a access broker listing, treat it as confirmation, not a heads up that your credentials were compromised, and they might already be knocking at the front door to get in. So next slide. Okay, cool. So yeah, Steve's going to show you technical side of behavioral detection, catches, attacks, and what that looks like on legitimate surfaces. But I'll pass it to Steve to elaborate.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Matt. Hi again, everybody. So for this quarter's briefing, I want to focus on a specific attack technique, such as software supply chain attacks. My team spent much of the last few months on these attacks because they've become more advanced, they've sped up, and they've really broadly impacted a lot of organizations globally. So my team's job is to take these attacks apart, understand how they work, and build detection that holds up against them. Today, I'll walk through what's changed a little bit this year about these kinds of attacks, what it means for you all on how to defend from them, and a little bit on where we think it's heading, some of the research we're doing in this area. So I'll start off with a few examples of high-profile incidents. The first is a Light LLM, is a widely used AI infrastructure package. It was compromised with a PyPI package Trojan after attackers stole publishing credentials that was used by Light LLM. So the installer pulled in malicious code as soon as it ran. The other, Axios, is a huge target considering it's the most popular JavaScript HTTP library. It was hijacked on NPM when an attacker used actually a legitimate legacy credential that the maintainers had forgotten to revoke, and they were able to publish a malicious package. Another is CPU-Z. This is a trusted Windows diagnostic tool. It was exploited in a watering hole attack, meaning attackers placed a malicious installer on an official-looking site, and the installer was even correctly signed, so it looked legitimate, but had malicious activity once it was downloaded and run. These are a few of the headliners. We saw many other similar attacks under software supply chain heading, Poison VS Code extensions, other command line tools, and many others. All of them share one characteristic, which is the core of a supply chain attack. none of them asked a user to do anything out of the ordinary from their usual day-to-day work. Each one of these arrived through software that people already trusted and it, in almost all circumstances already approved to run in their environment. Our SentinelOne threat report actually described these attacks really well, where they said the identity is verified, but the intent has been subverted. So supply chain attacks aren't new, but we did see several trends so far this year where we're seeing some differences from the past that are emerging more in 2026. So next slide, please. The first trend is pace. Many of these attacks are now from related groups acting in really quick succession. In several cases, a single actor was responsible for a cascade of attacks within just a few days, where they were able to compromise one upstream dependency and then use it to reach the next one. A few years ago, typical supply chain incidents were usually opportunistic individuals that were able to slip one code into a package by finding some credentials. Last year, we saw some more self-replicating worms that were able to move across a lot of packages on their own. And this year, threat actors are more organized, running these attacks as campaigns over time. Each year, these attackers are becoming more capable and more able to quickly hit very popular packages and applications that are distributed globally very, very quickly. Again, one of the reasons attackers pick things that are very popular packages is because they're automatically downloaded very fast, and within a few minutes, they're distributed globally before many defenders are able to see that it's happened. Another trend is that people are now more exposed. It's tempting to treat supply chain risk as a developer problem, something that only the build team, only software engineers have to worry about. That's no longer the case. So for instance, the CPU-Z example is a hardware diagnostic utility. That watering hole is actually specifically aimed at IT pros and other enthusiasts and not necessarily targeted towards software engineers. Anyone downstream of a poison dependency, which could be anyone in an organization now, inherits this exposure. Everyone whose machine eventually runs that code is exposed, and it can expose parts of the environment even far beyond the individual that downloaded it and ran it in the first place. The third trend that is accelerating all of this is agentic AI. In one of the light LLM cases that we examined, the compromised package was pulled in without a person directly involved at all. An AI coding assistant that was running with auto-approved permissions updated the dependency on its own, and then the payload tried to execute it. There wasn't human review in that specific step. The place where a person might have noticed something's wrong is the step that gets removed by these agentic AI agents. And in these cases, the human operator may not even know that the AI agent is installing third-party packages to get the job done that it was prompted to. So we're seeing as more organizations let agents install new code, run and execute, they're extending the trust boundary to the AI agent's judgment and everything that it will decide to download and run. And we're seeing attacks play out this way today. Next slide. So what can we all do about this in defending? I want to start with what's in your control before I get to detection technologies, because really the biggest improvements you can make are upstream of when detection technologies like what my team builds actually start to work. The first is hardening your build and delivery pipeline in cases where you do have centralized and or critical software development going on. This is pinning dependencies so you don't silently pull the new version of everything, and gating new packages as much as possible with a software bill of materials, especially constraining auto updates as much as is realistic, especially for things that can install and execute without any sort of human review. Also, applying least privilege to your CI systems. This one's tough and often forgotten because it's really easy to give a CI and automated jobs full access to internal infrastructure, but these continuous integration machines are most exposed to malicious code from supply chain attacks that attempt to spread laterally using stolen local credentials from those machines. This is a very unglamorous security hygiene work, but it really significantly raises the bar for adversaries. Second, Work as much as possible on extending your visibility to all workstations, including ones that aren't obviously developer or CI machines. A really clear lesson from the past few months is that the line between what's a developer machine and what's a normal employee machine has really faded because people across the business are running more CLI tools. They're installing software packages. They're using AI agents that pull down code. And we've seen things like those watering hole attacks and CLI attacks. Those were largely targeted to non-developer endpoints. So if you only instrument the obvious development and engineering infrastructure, you'll end up having blind spots where a lot of these attacks are increasingly aimed. Third, and this is the newest and fastest development area for all of us, start to get visibility into how AI agents are being used across your environment. This is which teams are running coding agents, with what permissions, can they install packages? If they can execute code, do they have permissions to reach to other credentials or other parts of your infrastructure? Start by scoping it. A more complete policy, enforcement of guardrails, those things can come later, but it's really hard to start if you can't see the scope of the risk and what's being used in your organization. AI agent activity is becoming a really critical piece of context for interpreting everything else that's going on at runtime on machines in enterprises. A process that looks really suspicious on its own might be an agent doing something legitimate, or it might be an agent that just installed something that never should have run. So having that visibility into how AI is integrated into business processes will be really critical. Next slide. Now on to detection, where this is really where my team works the most and lives. And I'll give you the bad news first, and it follows directly from the idea I mentioned earlier about abused trust. Any layer of defense that works by asking, what is this thing, will by design let these kinds of software supply chain attacks through. The signatures are valid, so signature checks pass, the package is on the allow lists, reputation pass, allow listing lets things through, the source URLs look like the legitimate ones, even software bill of materials will accurately report that you're running the exact compromised version of this package because the bill of materials just describes the identity of the package, but not the expected behavior of what it's going to do when it starts to run. All of these kinds of controls answer questions around what is this thing? And in a software supply chain attack, the usual answer is it's a source that you already trusted. This is a built-in limitation of this reputation-based detection and protection model. So if you can't separate good from bad by asking what something is, the question that works is what does it do? That shift is the entire reason that behavioral detection exists. The moment they execute, these things start to behave much differently because the malicious code has to do something. It has to decode a hidden payload, spawn a process that the package would normally have no reason to spawn, reach out to infrastructure that it shouldn't be reaching out to. So the good news here is that the malicious behavior shows itself the moment the code reaches the endpoint and runs. You can detect it by recognizing what this code does, even when you've never seen that specific payload before. So here's the part that me and my team find most reassuring. When you look at what these attacks did once they started to execute, it's surprisingly ordinary. Light LLM's payload was a Python process that decoded and ran obfuscated code. This is a behavior that we've seen in written detections for many years. The Axios renamed a binary, launched PowerShell from a non-standard path, another familiar pattern. CPU-Z, which is a hardware tool, spawned a compiler toolchain, which CPU-Z on itself would have no reason to do. These second stage behaviors is what endpoint detection has understood for a long time. So recognizing that behavior is really what matters. It doesn't require a unique signature for every single payload. And in the incidents that we analyzed, behavioral detections for these common tactics generally fired on the same day that the attack launched, before anyone had a specific signature for that payload or that software supply chain attack. Next slide. So let me turn that into a few principles that my team engineers against that help us specifically handle these kinds of software supply chain attacks. The first principle is catching behavior anomalies, verifying an application at runtime rather than trusting what it claims to be or what it claims it'll do. So this trust has to be earned at runtime every single time when the code runs, when the package starts to execute. Any sort of reputation, correct name, valid signature doesn't give it a free pass. In practice, that means modeling and monitoring what normal looks like for processes and then flagging deviations rather than maintaining just an ever-growing list of things that we know are bad. The second principle is to track the campaign over time and not just a single malware sample or a single malicious package. Attackers are really economical. They reuse the tooling, they reuse infrastructure and techniques, even when they change the specific package or even the specific programming language that they're poisoning. Their actor was behind several of this year's incidents. They kept reusing recognizable patterns across these different targets. So when we study one incident, we can map that campaign and we can build detection around the durable techniques that the actor keeps referring to. It's very expensive for attackers to go back and develop entirely new techniques for every attack, so they usually don't. The third principle is to keep scrutinizing later stages in the entire execution chain, even when the first stage or the first few stages look completely legitimate. The installation is going to be signed. It may look clean. That's the premise of a software supply chain attack. But the attack usually reveals itself a few seconds later, or maybe if a scheduled task, maybe hours or days later. So it's important to track the entire chain of what happens after execution begins. The fourth principle is to layer this detection, because a single vantage point is not going to catch everything. You do want reputation and intelligence on the front end. You want pre-execution analysis of these packages themselves, but also you want post-execution behavior monitoring at runtime. And even across endpoints, you want anomaly detection across your entire environment. Consistently across platforms, Windows, Mac, Linux, because these campaigns are very deliberately cross-platform. They often target scripting languages that can run almost anywhere. So each of these detection layers catches structurally what the other ones can't, which is what defense in depth really means for this kind of approach. Next slide. So start to close off here with what my team is watching and developments that we're seeing kind of start to play out over the course of this year. It's shaping our research roadmap and where we think things might be going. The first is AI agents are becoming both a target and a weapon. We're starting to see malware that specifically goes after coding agents running in permissive, like skip permissions or YOLO modes, because agents with broad permissions is a useful proxy to act to. And a related development is misuse of the AI services themselves. That includes things like LLM jacking, where attackers can steal cloud credentials and then use those to run up someone else's model bill or launch attacks based on use of these services from the credentials that they stole, and just broader general abuse of these hosted model APIs. The credential harvesting payloads in this year's campaigns were already searching for exactly these kinds of credentials. The second development is speed and tailoring. AI is shortening the time between a vulnerability becoming public and a working exploit existing, from sometimes days or weeks of skilled human effort to, in many cases, just a few hours or minutes. That same capability lets attackers tailor a payload to specific environments that it lands in instead of necessarily shipping a single generic version. And both of these really shrink the window that defenders have to react, which, again, favors detection that works without necessarily having seen the exact iteration of a threat before. The third development, this is one that we are putting real research energy into, is AI-authored polymorphic malware. And the concern here is code that's deeply ephemeral, polymorphic, obfuscated, functionally identical while very structurally different, but largely built with AI coding agents. We've seen proof of concepts for this, like PromptLock, Black Mamba. IBM observed an AI-generated framework they called Sloppily in a live ransomware intrusion. And our Unsentinel Labs team documented Mal Terminal, which is among the earliest known GPT-powered malware. So these things do exist. It's still early days. Many of them are proof of concepts. And here's why I'm not especially worried about it, because polymorphism in this way is an attack, again, on signatures, and it can change quite a lot what the code looks like before it runs, but does not change too much about what happens after execution starts and the way in which credentials may be stolen or privilege escalation attacks actually run. So that makes the behavioral detection even more important, because the signature-based or code structure-based detection is becoming less and less relevant over time. Last thing, one more slide here. Yeah, thanks. So one more thing before I finish up. It's easy to have a talk like this focused only on how AI is helping attackers. But my team is seeing the other side of this every day as we continue our development. AI really helps defenders. We're seeing that AI tools have the potential to create actually an asymmetrical upside for defenders to an extent that I haven't seen in my career in cybersecurity so far. We're using it as a co-pilot in detection engineering to analyze hundreds or thousands of variations of attack patterns so that the detections that we ship can hold up against variants that we haven't even encountered yet. It also helps us monitor more telemetry data faster so that we can see trends as they emerge and push out emergency coverage when necessary in hours instead of weeks. And it makes our human experts a lot more effective because it's able to work with them to surface, cluster, prioritize subtle signals and anomalies in the data so that our threat hunters can spend more of their time on like hard judgment calls and less of their time churning through large data sets. So here's the takeaway that I'll leave you with. These attacks are accelerating, and also more and more they'll start to arrive as software that you trust or you think you trust. The defense for it has to work at one runtime, has to watch what the software does. It has to work at machine speed because that's how fast this threat is moving. And we're starting to gain an advantage as we can use these same AI developments to build defensive technologies that are able to see these variations and adapt as fast or even faster than the attacks that we're defending against. So the last part of the webinar, before we wrap up, Matt, Tom, and I are going to go around the room and share a final takeaway from the talk. So the question is, what's one thing that we tell you all, the defenders, about what you need to know, what you should be doing today after this talk? So I'll start off. I definitely know what I would say here. I recommend everybody to experiment with these new AI technologies, especially agentic projects and coding agents. The space is moving really, really fast. Every couple of weeks, there's a new application or a new model, or new models get new skills and capabilities. And I'll admit, I was pretty skeptical about agentic AI at first. But now I'm regularly surprised by the things that they do, like automatically pulling down code and running it, for instance. So my recommendation to everyone is experiment with these things, try out different vendors and technology, have some fun with it if you can, but then start to get an intuition for where these tools might be a vulnerability for your organization. So I'll hand it back to Matt next. Matt, what do you think?
Cool. Yeah, I think one of my key takeaways from this is more around the attack surface for an organization where, before, your security team runs out and buys another tool, I would say you really need to spend time on, auditing legitimate platforms within your environment, your RMMs, your MDMs, your identity stack, and find out who has admin access into each of them, whether that access is protected by, a phishing resistant credential. And what I mean by phishing resistant credentials is, if it's protected with like a FIDO2 key, like a YubiKey, and not just relying on SMS, because, one thing that we've seen with some of these more advanced threat actors is doing SIM swapping. So where they can actually port over the SIM card on with your telecom provider, and they can get the two-factor authentication sent to a device of their choosing. So that is one way that they do get around two factors. So using hardware keys along with that is going to help you in the long run. But Tom?
Yeah, thanks, guys. I think I'm gonna kind of take the approach of kind of combining both of your answers here. For one, I think being very excited about new technologies and get your hands in them is the one way forward to not only keep up with our adversaries, but also try and outpace them, like Steve was kind of going at. But to your point, Matt, everything that we touch, every new technology we get exposed to, as we've seen with new LLM models that have come out, or even new geopolitical events or just things that are happening in the world, every one of those becomes an opportunity for an attacker to not only evolve attack sophistication, attack techniques, but to also just generally seek out easy opportunities to outpace the defenders. So get your hands in these technologies and make sure you're securing them, but be aware that everything that happens in the world also acts as an opportunity for an attacker to benefit one way or another. And I think staying on top of this all, getting exposure to the newest technologies is unfortunately or fortunately the way to be aware of what's going on. Like Steve was mentioning, understand how these add as vulnerabilities to your organization, but get them and explore with how they can improve what you do as a defender overall as well.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for engaging with us. That was a great way to wrap things up. Before you go, I want to point out that our speakers have chosen those resources that are available for you to see here: blogs, articles, white papers we think are relevant. They're all there in the resources section. And as a reminder, a copy of today's session is going to be sent to you via email as it was recorded. Please expect that in the next few days. Everybody stay safe out there. See you next time.